We return now to our top story. In a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court struck down most of President Trump's sweeping tariffs that he imposed last year. The president then announced a new tariff plan at a press conference today, saying, quote, other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones the court incorrectly rejected, end quote. CBS News' legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. So what did the justices in the majority actually strike down, and what was the key reasoning?
It's good to talk to you again. So, what the majority found is that the president does not have the power under this federal statute, the IEEPA, to impose these big reciprocal tariffs. Why not? Because if we start at the Constitution, which we always need to, the Constitution gives Congress the power to impose taxes, to regulate commerce. Can Congress give some of that power away? Absolutely. But they need to be very clear when they do give power away. And they need to say something akin to, and this gives the president the power to impose tariffs. In this case, what the majority said is that's not in this particular statute. And therefore, the president stepped beyond his authority when he tried to use this federal law to impose the tariffs. Lindsay, as you said, that doesn't mean this is the end of the road when it comes to the president trying to impose tariffs. He's looking at other legal avenues. He's looking at other statutes to see if that will give him the power to do so.
So could the other authority he's trying to invoke also be met with legal challenge?
Absolutely. And I think at this point, the president has pointed to a couple of different statutes, one of them, a particular statute, and he's pointing to a particular part, section 122. I don't think it's ever been used to impose a tariff before. It would require a finding of a trade deficit, and then it allows the president, I believe, to impose tariffs for 150 days. At that point, Congress would need to ratify. So I think what we're seeing, Lindsay, with all the other options is that more is required on the front end. There are more requirements, and more is limited on the back end, meaning these statutes don't quite allow the president to do what he wanted to do with these particular tariffs, which is basically that they would go on for an indefinite period of time and apply broadly to lots of different goods and services and lots of different countries as well.
You taught a bunch of classes today. What were some of the top lines that you and your students talked about?
So what we talked about is, I said, let's remember the federal government is a government of enumerated powers. What does that mean? It means that Congress can only act if the Constitution says, here's how you can act. The president can only act if the Constitution says, here's how you can. And that this decision is really a decision in my mind that affirms the idea that we have a separation of powers, that Congress gets to do this stuff generally, but it can give some of its power away, but it has to give the president a roadmap. We also, to be honest, talked about the idea that a lot of my students feel like this is a conservative court, but this is a big loss for the Trump administration. And we talked about how this case might be different from other cases where the president has said, I have really broad power, and the Supreme Court says yes. That's typically when the president is making decisions about his branch, the executive branch. Here, the president is leaping outside the executive branch, and we have a different outcome.
My tuition check is in the mail. Jessica Levinson, thank you. How could the Supreme Court's ruling on the emergency tariffs impact your wallet? The overall average effective tariff rate, or how much on average it costs to import items, went down about 8 percentage points because of the emergency tariffs being invalidated, according to Yale's Budget Lab. That's still the highest rate since 1946, though, excluding 2025. When you put that into dollars, if the Supreme Court had upheld the tariffs, the average consumer would have paid between $1,300 and $1,700 more over the course of 2026 without being able to use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, that we keep talking about. That number fell. It's still between $600 and $800 more in 2026. That's because the Supreme Court's ruling will only target tariffs that were put into effect by IEEPA. So out of all the tariff revenue collected last year, about half of it could be refunded and is no longer eligible to be levied this year. Other tariffs implemented by the Trump administration are still in effect. Take a look at your screen. The ones imposed under a national security exemption of trade law known as Section 232. We've been talking about that, too. That includes tariffs on steel, aluminum, automobiles, timber, buses, some semiconductors. Some of those tariffs, like steel and aluminum, are as high as 50%. The group likely to see the largest effect from these tariffs being overturned are American businesses. They pay the brunt of tariff costs when importing products and haven't really passed the majority on to consumers, according to CBS News Money Watch. Even before today's Supreme Court decision, more than 1,500 companies had filed lawsuits in trade court, according to Bloomberg. That includes major companies like Costco, Crocs, and Goodyear Tires. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Reuters last week the Treasury has enough to reimburse IEEPA tariff revenue if ordered to, but today's Supreme Court decision didn't set forward a specific plan for that.